You know, Marc, despite the weight of this week, the weight of coming into a new year that doesn't feel so new, we have some pretty exciting news. Like, we finished 2020 and started 2021 with some really exciting news. And you were on a field trip this week.
I did. I left my home office that I've just reset up, and I got to go on a fun little field trip down to Wyndham House, where I met lots of Lakesiders, got to direct traffic a little bit with all the packages coming in with new home kits. There's about $4,000 or $5,000 of home kits. That's an estimate. I don't know how well our people are at couponing, but there was a lot of stock. Yeah. I mean, it took about 7 cars to get it all down and unloaded. And then I got to be the person that handed over $20,000 in checks to Wyndham House. So we not only surpassed our goal, we totally topped up their Christmas campaign. And I just want to say, if ever you have a check for $20,000 to hand over to a charity, I volunteer, okay? I'll take the drive, I'll do it. It was so much fun, it was so exciting.
So generous of you.
I know, I'm so sacrificial.
It's so sacrificial. Yeah, and we did that, and you know, there was some concern, right? We're in the midst of a pandemic.
Yes.
We're very committed to Hope House. That's the heartbeat of Lakeside.
Hope House is one of the things that we started at this church.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how would that impact our givings to Hope House? Well, the good news is we were able to give $55,000 to Hope House this past year, which is $22,000 more than in 2019. And if you were all sitting here this morning, I know that there would be applause.
Yes.
Because that is good news, and we just want to thank you for your generosity. I found that really exciting.
Yeah, it's just amazing how as we engage on this less under our tree, more for the world, even in the midst of a pandemic, it's almost like that rose the tide for all the boats. And so Hope House got more, Wyndham House got more, and I just heard from this week that actually our own budget here at Lakeside finished the year off in the black. Woo-hoo. Which again, so 3 areas for huge celebration. So I mean, you could say just between those 2 charities, we sent over $80,000 in money and supplies just this year. And that's of the things we know about.
Right, yeah. There's all kinds of things we don't have.
There's lots of people that give to Hope House just directly, not coming through us. There's Joy Home Tour, Backpack Campaign, Hope in the Street, Coldest Night of the Year, all the volunteer hours, and then don't forget tens of thousands of dollars from Scrap Goat.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if I remember correctly, I believe that we started 2020 as a church with the word generous. That's what we felt God was laying on our heart.
I do remember that, yeah.
So, you know, we can celebrate that. God laid something on our heart, and we trusted. And yeah, look what we have to celebrate now.
Yeah,
that's
pretty
amazing.
Exciting. So don't forget your word for the year. It's funny that, you know, there was a midpoint in the pandemic where I was like, it's ironic that our word was generosity, because I feel like we haven't really focused on it. And yet those last few months, God just brought that back, and you guys responded. So it's just so encouraging to see that.
Yeah. And I'm really excited because we're starting a new series today, a series on community. And I know that is a word that gets overused, but I'm telling you, it is packed with substance. So I'm pretty excited as you kick off this series today, Marc.
Me too. It's a brand new series. For those of you joining us the first time, a series is basically where we take a topic, talk about it for a few weeks till you get tired of it, and then we move to another topic. So this series is called Open, Creating Community in an Isolated World. Now I gotta tell you, the title that you get is never the actual title that I come up with. Thankfully, we have a team that often will be like, Marc, I don't think that's such a great idea. So the original title was Open, Fighting for Community in an Isolated World. They're like, Marc, I think in the midst of lockdowns and everything, for a church to be saying fighting for community, I feel like people are gonna think that we're trying to defy lockdown orders and encouraging people to meet. So maybe creating community is a better word. And I was like, good, thanks for saving us a lawsuit. So anyways, we are not inviting you to defy quarantine in any way, but we were really excited to talk about community. Now, the question I always have to answer is a question my pastor used to answer all the time when I was a kid was, why this series and why now? Why this series and why now? And it's a great question, especially because we're talking about community in a time when we're in lockdown, right? It's kind of like writing a cookbook for a friend of yours that's fasting. It's like, it's kind of just salt in the wound. Like, what is the point? Marc, we know we need community. We know we're lonely, but we can't do anything about it. We're locked down. So why is this the right series? And I'll tell you why. Because loneliness didn't come to the surface because of COVID. Like, it's not like loneliness is an issue because of COVID. COVID highlighted an issue that was bubbling below the surface for a very long time. In fact, the first few months of COVID, many of you said things like, wow, I thought I had some close friends, and I realized I don't. I thought I had some really connected people that I had even at my church at Lakeside, and yet it's been 3 months and I've called nobody. Didn't really know who to call, and nobody's called me. I had people I said hi to, I chatted with, but nobody that I had deep, intimate community with. That we've actually had a community and loneliness problem for a long time. In fact, it's fascinating to read the different polls and surveys that have been done. They actually tell us that North America is one of the most lonely cultures on the planet. There was a study done in 2019 before the pandemic. Okay, so these are pre-pandemic numbers. And it wasn't just like this simple survey of, do you feel lonely, yes or no? There was an 80-point measurement scale on asking different questions and variables and all this stuff. And at the end of it, these researchers from a university down south actually said 63% of men and 58% of women identify as lonely. That's staggering to me. That tells me something that's probably really encouraging to you. It means you're not alone in your aloneness. That one of the biggest things about loneliness is that people think they're the only ones who struggle with loneliness. But what we discovered through that survey, and maybe just even personal experience and anecdotes, is that many, many people, in fact, most people that you meet, odds are they are lonely versus not lonely. It's something that we struggle with. You'd think that with social media, we'd be able to reconnect and connect with more, but they actually found the more you use social media, the more, not less, you struggled with loneliness. And you're ready for the generation that struggles the most with loneliness? 18 to 22-year-olds. 18 to 22-year-olds are the loneliest generation on our planet. Studies have shown not only is it bad for our mental health, which we know, it's actually bad for our physical health. I loved one survey. It said, bad health habits like smoking, poor eating, obesity, alcohol. If you have all those bad habits and yet you have strong social ties, you're living longer, or significantly longer, than people who have a healthy lifestyle but live in isolation. Just pause and think about that. You can have unhealthy habits and healthy relationships, and you're living significantly longer than people who have healthy habits but live in isolation. I love what John Ortberg once said. He said, "It is better to eat Twinkies with friends than broccoli alone." I love that. So why now? It's like, okay, Mark, clearly we have a loneliness issue. It's like a loneliness pandemic in the midst of a pandemic. So why now though? How is this gonna be helpful? Well, because we're aware of the need right now. We can see it, we feel it, and so let's do what we can. Let's claw at it. So as things begin to open up, or as different technologies open up and we avail ourselves of them to make sure we never end up in this place again. It's kind of like when COVID hit the first time and we all had lockdown, and I opened my chest freezer and found Freezies and popsicles, and I went into my pantry and found a bunch of beans that I didn't like, and that's why they had been stored there. And I realized this isn't really the point, is it? And ever since then, I've been slowly building up and curating freezer meals. I've actually learned how to flat pack meals. I've watched YouTube videos on it. I know it sounds nerdy, but I'm all in. My freezer is packed with meals prepared, because I realized I had a problem and I wanted to do something about it, so I never faced that again. And the same for community. And so if you're here today and you're kind of watching, you're like, listen, Mark, I believe in community. In fact, community has been such an amazing thing for me. And in the church, it's been amazing. And so this series is just going to be encouraging and spurring you along and calling you deeper. There are others of you, it's like, no, community and church feels like an oxymoron to me. Mark, you don't know my story, but that's one thing I just cannot engage in. I come, I engage, I read, I have my disciplines, but community, I don't want to have anything to do with it because I have a story and you can't imagine. And listen, I'm telling you, I've heard so many stories and I get it. Those are both valid emotions. Those are both valid experiences. And I'm hoping that this series will, for those of you who have experienced deep community in the church, call you deeper. And for those of you who have maybe written it off, this will maybe invite you back to see it a little bit differently. I'm excited for the messages we have, the content we have planned, and some of the conversations and interviews that we're gonna do over the next few weeks. So today what I want to do is just intro the topic. And I want to just cover two big misunderstandings that often come up when talking about community in the church. So two big misunderstandings and then one big truth. And we're going to have an interview at the end that I'm really, really excited to share with you. So the first one, the big misunderstanding with community is this: Jesus is my boyfriend. That's what I call it. The Jesus is my boyfriend myth, right? It goes something like this: I have Jesus, I don't need anyone else. I have Jesus, he's my best friend. I don't need anyone else. As a pastor, I talk to lots of people who are struggling with loneliness, and this often comes up. It sounds something like this. They say, Mark, I know I should be happy with Jesus. I know I have Jesus, but I just want a friend. I just want a group of people to call my own. Like, I just want some people to share life with. And usually something like this comes up in the story. It's like, and I know I should be happy with Jesus because I have a friend of mine, and they get up at 5 o'clock every morning, and they spend like 5 hours with Jesus in prayer in their little prayer closet, and they're just so delighted and so full. They don't need anyone else. And I just feel so guilty that somehow, for some reason, I have Jesus, but like I don't know, maybe I'm just like a poor human being, but I want other relational connections too. It's like I want Jesus plus people. And they don't know what to do with that. And I'm like, oh, I think I know what's happening. And it's that idea that maybe you've heard before. It's this: there's a God-shaped void in every human heart that only God can fill. Have you heard that, right? Like there's a God-shaped void in every human heart that only God can fill. And I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm saying misunderstanding this statement has caused people a lot of problems. If you want to turn in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, we're going to jump over the scripture, all over the scriptures today, but Genesis 2, verse 18, I want to read it for you this morning. I just want to tell you, this is the story of creation. And yet, woman hasn't been created yet. So it's Adam and God, the animals and creation, but no Eve yet, okay? God walks in the cool of day. He has conversations with Adam. They have perfect relationship. There's no sin. The fall hasn't happened yet. They have a great relationship, okay? And this is what we read, Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. The Lord God said, looking at Adam and all of creation, it's not good for the man to be alone. To which I kind of read that and I'm like, he's not alone, God. He has you. Like, you're with him. He has perfect relationship. It's you and him. You can take on anything. And God's like, no, it's not okay for him to be alone. And then what does he do? Let's keep reading. I will make a helper suitable for him. I will make a helper suitable for him. It's like, I'm going to create another human being. It's like, what's going on here? It's like, he needs relationship. He needs relationship with another human being. So when we say there's a God-shaped void in every human heart that only God can fill, that is completely accurate. We are made as human beings for relationship with God. When we do not have a relationship with God, we are lacking. We are made in God's image. We were made for that relationship. That's true. But it is also accurate to say there is a human-shaped void in every human heart that God will not fill. Not because he can't or couldn't, it's the way that he created the world. God made the world in a way that we rely on certain things: food, clothing, shelter. We don't say to someone who's hungry, it's just like, well, just pray more. If you just have more God, you won't need food. It's like, no. God created the world that you need food and clothing and shelter and water. Those are normal. And you know what else is in that list? Relationship. That when God walks into creation and sees Adam and there's no other human beings, it's like, this isn't okay. Like, I'm here, creation's beautiful, the food's great, but this is not okay because you were alone and I actually made you as a relational, communal being, and you need relationship to survive. And he creates Eve. So the first misunderstanding is to try and just simplify our relationship. It's like, if you have God, you need nothing else. It's like, that's not how God designed the world. So don't oversimplify. Don't make it a this or that, as Jeff talked about in the Monday 5 this week so brilliantly. It's the power of and. It's God and people. We're made for a relationship with God and people. The second big misunderstanding I think that happens is the overpromise, underdeliver. Overpromise, underdeliver. I love the way that Ruth Haley Barton says it. She says this: community is the most overpromised, underdelivered aspect of the church today. Community is the most overpromised, underdelivered aspect of the church today. And I know some of you are like, but Mark, we've had an amazing community. I'm not disagreeing with you. I can tell you amazing stories of the community that myself and my family found when they became Jesus followers and the way the church accepted them, like incredible stories. And I know so many of you Lakesiders have those stories, but for other people, in fact, people have checked out, it was the most overpromised, underdelivered element of the church. In fact, remember this image? Remember this image? We saw this all the time growing up in church, right? It was like, join a small group, join a life group, and it was just like this strange picture of clip art with people holding hands. And I was like, what happens if I join that group? Well, I have to stand in a circle and hold hands? Do we sing Kumbaya? Like, this is just awkward palm sweat. Like, I don't really want to join this, right? Like, I don't quite understand it. It's because we kind of made this overpromise. It's like, if you join a group, you find your people, you will share in this authentic, romantic relationship, you'll be known. It's almost like this: if you build it, they will come. If you join a group, you will find everything you ever wanted in humanity. And you're like, actually, I have a story, Mark, about the 7 different small groups that I joined and how horrible every single one of them was. That's not all of your stories, but some of you, it is. And you're like, but I joined, I signed up, I went for years, and I never had this authentic community that I often hear us talking about and that we're gonna talk about over the next few weeks. And I think, often we think there was like ill intent that deceived us. I don't actually think that. I genuinely think there are many of us, myself included, who have had such incredible experiences in different ways, on serving on teams or joining a group. And then we kind of just reverse engineer and we're like, well, if I hadn't, started serving or if I hadn't joined a group, I wouldn't have had that. So therefore, if you join a group or if you join a team, you will find this perfect community that we talk about all the time. And it's just a bit more nuanced than that. You see, the problem is this vision for simple community. It's just like all of a sudden we find it and we're like, where have you been my whole life? You're perfect. It's kind of like we think that way with marriage too, right? We're just gonna find the right person and then all of a sudden we're gonna have a great marriage and don't realize it actually takes a lot of work. But this vision for simple community is not promised or modeled by Jesus. We miss the fact that Jesus had disciples that were quite complicated and complex. You ever just think about how imperfect and messy the disciples would have been? And they were together for a long time, right? Like Jesus grabbed a tax collector, he grabbed some religious students, he grabbed fishermen, he brought them all together. Can you just imagine? Those are extremes in a culture. That's almost like taking someone, the modern day equivalent of from the far right and the far left and saying, hey, why don't you join the same Bible study? In fact, you guys can sit together, see how that goes. Just share your opinions, share openly. It's gonna be great. Can you imagine? Right? You have a tax collector. I just imagine, I have this wild imagination, first day, orientation day, following Jesus. The tax collector shows up late because he was just trying to get a few more taxes before he kind of gave it up, just stock his pockets just in case, right? Shows up late, one chair left next to a fisherman, sits down, fisherman just kind of kisses his teeth, really, you're gonna sit next to me? Just kind of seriously? Bet your mom's real proud of you, right? I just kind of imagine, the back and forth. It's shut up. I know what you do with your tax return, right? I just imagine the animosity from the first moment. It wasn't hunky-dory in any way, shape, or form, right? There was betrayal in Jesus' friend circle. There was misunderstanding all the time. There was pity arguments. I'm greater. No, I'm greater. No, I'm greater. Well, I want this chair. No, I wanted that chair. You only want that chair because I wanted that chair, right? What is going on? Think of the number of times that Jesus has to say how many times. Guys, how many times do I have to tell you this? How many times does Jesus have to say how many times? It's wild. We think that this is this amazing group of people and we don't realize there was mess and there was imperfection in the midst of the beauty that we see there. The Jesus community, starting off with Jesus' disciples, it was the first act that he did in his public ministry, calling people to himself, has always been messy and will always be messy. It will always have its challenges, but that doesn't mean we tap out of it. And next week, I know some of you are like, but Mark, you don't know my story. Next week, we're gonna deal with what do you do with the bad stories and the bad experiences and those who have vowed never to try again. But today I want to just make this so clear. We can never see our faith as a solo endeavor. We can never see our faith as a solo endeavor or acquaintances that we keep at arm's length and we just talk about social niceties but never actually share the core of who we are. Community is mission critical to our faith. If I were to summarize it, I would say this: a life of spiritual transformation is impossible. I know it's a big word. Impossible without real and authentic community. A life of spiritual transformation. Transformation is what we're about here. We want to discover and fully follow Jesus. How do we follow Jesus? We are continually entering into transformation, okay? So a life of spiritual transformation, it's impossible. What we want to do at Lakeside is impossible without real and authentic community. Where do I get that from? Let's go to a passage that we often start a series with, because when Jesus was asked this question, I just think he gave us some fodder for what we should constantly be coming back to. When Jesus was asked, what is the most important law? This is what Jesus says, okay? Turn in your Bible, highlight, underline, circle this if you don't have it yet, because we come back to it, I swear, every month, okay? This is so mission critical. Love the Lord your God. This is Jesus answering what's the most important thing. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. It's love God with everything. And then he keeps going. He's I know you asked for one, but I can't stop there. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Jesus is I know you asked me for one, but it's actually two. Love God, love people. That's how I'd summarize what Jesus said. Love God, love people. Love God, love people. Here's another way to put it. Our love for God is demonstrated by our love for others. Our love for God is demonstrated by our love for others. We talked about this summer. Remember I gave the example? Like you can tell me like, Marc, we love you. Marc, we think you're fantastic. Marc, we worship your holy name. And then treat my kids like garbage? You don't love me. Why? Because if you love me, you'll treat my kids well. If you love me, you will love my children. Same for God. He makes that very clear. He's like, friends, the way you worship me is by loving the other beside you. Jesus was very clear on this. The way we have a horizontal relationship is actually a vertical relationship. By loving others, we are worshiping our Creator. How do you know you're growing in your relationship with God? Is it memorizing scripture, praying longer, going to church, listening to sermons, worshiping louder, raising our hands? Those all may be, markers of your faith growing, but the only ultimate determiner is your love for the other. Are you loving better? Are you loving in a greater way? Here's how I would summarize it. Spiritually mature people love deeply. Spiritually mature people love deeply. If you've been growing in your faith for 10 years and you're still the same jerk you were 10 years ago, you're not growing. I have to pause and think about that. I have to look at my relationships, look at the way I'm treating my wife and my children, and I just have to realize, God, it doesn't matter how my spiritual disciplines are going. If they're not impacting the way I love others, I'm not having an encounter with you that's meaningful. Spiritually mature people love deeply. So let's go back to it. A life of spiritual transformation is impossible without real and authentic community. Impossible without real and authentic community. So then here's the question. How do we find that? How do we find that real and authentic community? People to be real with, people who are safe to wrestle with and ask questions, to challenge each other in a loving and gentle way, in a kind way that calls us to be our best. People that we can do life with, how do we find that kind of community? I have no idea. I have no idea. No idea. Why do I say that? Because people are messy. I wish I could give you a recipe book. I wish I could say, just sign up for this and you're gonna find it. We guarantee it. Or we created the loneliness app. All you have to do is check the loneliness box. We'll find another lonely person. You'll come together and it'll be awesome. And soon you'll be journeying together on your life with Jesus, challenging each other, growing, praying for each other. I wanna just say that, but I can't. In fact, I'm reminded of the Apostle Paul's words. Paul, a Jesus follower who spread the message of Jesus all across the Mediterranean rim, had countless relationships, spent time in prison for the work that he was doing. He had an emotional roller coaster in his life, and the friendships all went around. He had disagreements with people. And I love this line. I come back to this so often in relationships. He says this. This is someone who's experienced in relationships. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. He doesn't say, hey, as Jesus followers, now you will live at peace with everyone. Let's just go back to that verse for a second, okay? It doesn't say live at peace with everyone. He says, as much as it's possible, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. What's he saying? He's saying sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it's outside of your control because relationships are messy. You can't just A plus B equals C in relationships. It's more nuanced than that. And so I'll let Ruth Haley Barton kind of close off this first part of the message before the interview because I think this is so critical to opening up our open series. The most important thing we need to understand deep in our souls, that Christian community, transforming community, that's what we're after, friends, is not something we create and bring about by human effort. That we cannot just say, if I do this, then do this, I will have authentic community. It is not that kind of equation. And then I'd say this, we don't find community, we open ourselves to it. We don't find community, we open ourselves to it. And that's why this series is called Open. Because we just want to every single week look at the life of Jesus and the way he did relationships and the way Jesus' followers did relationships. And we want to learn, listen, what are the things that we're doing in our lives to open ourselves to community every single day? We realize we're in lockdown. We realize there's so many limitations. We realize work and night shift and all that stuff. It's like nothing ever fits perfectly, but are we becoming people who are constantly doing as much as it relies on me, opening ourselves up to relationship? So the win in this series and the win as a church is not about finding or arriving at the perfect community and being a failure if we don't get there, but continually opening ourselves to it. And so what I want to do with this next part of a message is actually interview Robin. Robin is pastor of spiritual growth and leadership development here at Lakeside, and community is one of our core values. And so in a lot of ways, you could say that core value, Robin kind of holds up and holds responsibility for in a lot of ways. And so I invited Robin to actually chat with me a little bit. Now, Robin, to start the conversation, I want to go back to a conversation you and I had almost 2 years ago now. The first day we met, it was before you even applied for the job. You're smart. You're like, let me have coffee with these folks and just see what they're about. And then I'll decide if I want to apply, because websites lie. So you wanted to know what we were really like. So that was smart. And in that conversation, we talked about tons of things. But I remember, we talked about community groups, and you said something that felt like a career limiting move for someone who wants to oversee the aspect of community. You said community groups, we're talking about community groups. You're like, community groups, which we do, are great, but they're not for everyone. And I was like, what? So tell us a little bit about that, and kind of you explained it, and I'm totally on board now, but let our congregation know that has been mostly groups based, why you would say something like that.
Well, you're right, that was probably a career limiting move. But let me ask you this. When I say to you, Mark, would you like to join a small group? What's the first image that comes to your mind?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. I picture a living room, Bibles, set questions to go through, a 2-hour window, some snacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's probably what most people think of.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, the idea of being thrown together, because you signed you signed up for something, you registered online, being thrown together with a group of people back when we could be with a group of people, in a strange room, in a house, in someone's church, sitting around, maybe doing a Bible study or a book study, is like just terrifying to them. I mean, that's just not their personality type. It's not how they're wired. I mean, I know when I go to conferences or whatever, and you're in a lecture and you're enjoying it, and then all of a sudden the lecturer says, now we're just going to have a breakout session. And I just want you to turn to the person on your left, and I'm thinking, I'm out of here. I'm gone. Don't put me on the spot like that. And so for a lot of people, that's how they feel about small groups. But I think that what we're after is connection. You said it in your message. It's transformation. And we are a species that loves programming.
Yeah.
And I think inadvertently we have focused on the method. We love methods. We focus on the method of programming community rather than on the posture of people becoming the kind of people who can be in community. Because you have to actually become more like Jesus, become a certain person in order to sustain and maintain community. Yes. And so in a way, it's kind of circular. You participate in a group in order to become the kind of person who can sustain being in a group. So in that sense, it's a little circular. But our goal is transformation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And small groups are fantastic. Don't hear me say I'm not about small groups. They're a method, though. They're one vehicle.
Yes.
They're not the end game.
Yes. Okay. So talk to me more about that idea of, you talked about becoming community versus programming community.
Right. So as I said, our goal is to be more like Jesus. Our goal is transformation, and you just really crushed it in your sermon, by the way. And Ruth Haley Barton, if you haven't read her, folks, you just got to grab a Ruth Haley Barton book.
Yeah,
Any book.
Do you remember the title of the book on the community one? It has community in one of the words, and it's purple under the jacket. Because do you keep your book jackets, by the way?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, I don't.
Oh.
Would you like mine? No.
Sure. Okay. But anyway, I often think it would be so much easier to follow Jesus if it weren't for people.
Yes.
Like, just people irritate me, people wreck my spirituality, people just get in the way of me following Jesus. And yet, right, you said, love God, love people. We can't actually be Jesus followers if we're not with people, in community with people, bearing with people, as Paul said. And that bearing with, we tend to think it's bearing with as in, helping people through their tough times. And it's that, but it's actually more along the lines of bearing with their faults, putting
Yes.
up with their faults, living with their faults, and loving them in spite of their faults, hoping to and expecting to they're going to love us
Yes.
through our faults, right?
Yeah, we're going to do a whole message on that. I'm excited about that.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect. So yeah, the iron sharpening iron, the bearing with, that's all part of being in community. And it doesn't have to happen in a small group, but a small group is one of the places that we can at least create the space for that to happen.
So then, with that said, I love that idea of, okay, it's a method, but we then don't worship the method. Otherwise, we have butts in seats, but there's no guarantee there's actual transformation happening. I often talk to people, they're like, no, but my faith is private. Like, I come to church, I do my disciplines at home, like, I love Jesus, but like, I just don't have time, or I'm a really private person, so I just prefer not to do it with community, whether that's community groups or some other community element. What do you say to people like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, part of that is we're just a product of our culture. We are a very individualistic culture, and being, you know, in this century, this millennium in North America, we have the luxury of church buildings. And that in a way has given us the luxury, although it's not to our benefit, of being able to come to a place, do our worship thing, and go home and just hang out with the few people that we connect with.
Yes.
But we don't have to actually rub shoulders with the people that irritate us. When we think of the early church and the church for the first 400 years, and really the church around the world today in a lot of places, if you're a Jesus follower, that's the people you're stuck with.
Yeah.
Right there in your little village or in your basement hiding from the authorities, whether they irritate you or not.
Yeah.
And so there's this huge transformational piece about being in community and intentionally putting ourselves into that. Because I think we have I use the word luxury, it's actually not, it's a detriment, of actually thinking we can do the Jesus following thing alone, individually, personally, and we're actually transforming. But how would you know you're transforming until you're irritated by someone, offended by someone, right? Have to walk with someone through their pain. So that community piece is huge. Like it's absolutely essential. And it has actually, I think, two elements to it. One, it's missional.
Yep.
So Jesus said, you know, just before he left, Father, may they be one as we are one. Well, how do you be one apart?
Yeah.
So that the world may know. Like, it has a missional consequence. When the world looks at us and goes, oh my goodness, the fisherman and the tax collector, the right wing and the left wing, they love each other, they're together. So there's the missional piece. There's also...
And that's shocking to me, that Jesus actually says, like, your relationship, people will actually discover me through that. Whereas often, at least I often grew up thinking, like, I don't have time for a relationship. That's comfort. I have to tell people about Jesus. Just like, no, actually the way that you relate to people in deep, intimate ways actually is, in a sense, preaching the message of Jesus to others as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we fooled ourselves into thinking, like, as long as we believe the right things and hoist that on other people, you know, we're doing our job.
Yeah, no, they can
when
tell.
In fact, they look at us and our relationships and go, not sure I want to be part of that, right?
That's exactly it.
And it certainly historically in down through the church, we can see where actually non-believing historians have marveled at how the church loves each other.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it is a testimony.
And then later in history, you have Gandhi, who then says, I like your Christ, but not your Christians. So we've flipped it, right? And that's...
What an indictment.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing is a place of belonging. At some point, that going it alone isn't going to work so well. We need a place of belonging. We're created for, as you said today, belonging. We're created for companionship. And I just think this whole idea of a spiritual companion, it doesn't even have to be a group. A group is just a method that perhaps you could find that person. It could be someone who's already in your life, and you can scale that up to a deeper relationship. But that sacred companion, that sacred circle is so key. One of my favorite authors on this, David Benner, he said, soul friends seek to safeguard each other's uniqueness and to nurture the growth of the inner self. And so I have a couple of friends that are my sacred companions. I can't even remember I think we probably landed accidentally in this sacred circle. We were probably all going through a really difficult time. I know for me, I was in leadership at my church, and it was It was a struggle. It was not going well. It was very toxic. It ended up in a split. And I just was feeling so alone. And we just decided to meet every 3 weeks. Just meet and pray together and just encourage each other. Mark, that was 10 years ago, and we're still doing that.
Wow.
And we have laughed and cried. And I think one of the key things about that is that we've given each other permission to speak honestly into each other's lives. So if I'm pouring out my complaints about whatever, they have permission to say to me, wow, Robin, that sounds painful. Do you think, if they sense this, that this could be coming from a place of fear, insecurity, jealousy, things that we're not always comfortable hearing, but when they come from people that you are walking with Jesus with, if that's even English, and you know they have your best. Like they want you to be the best you can be. You know it's coming from a place of love. And it takes tremendous humility actually to receive that, right? Without the great big, but first, just to receive that. And it's just been so beautiful. And we've just done that for each other. We've carried each other through family struggles and all kinds of struggles. And
you spoke about those sacred companions, and you just said, like, I don't even know how we stumbled upon each other. It wasn't we signed up for a Bible study. And it's interesting. So I have two kind of sacred companions that I kind of think about, and I'm like, both of them I actually met in a small group. One of them was a train wreck of a small group that it never worked. We just couldn't get. We were all like young adults, like 19, 20, and we just couldn't get our stuff together. But out of that, this relationship with these two gentlemen came about that I still call to this day, and we have that sacred companion stuff. So I love the idea, again, about not so much the method, but what the characteristics that Marc. Okay, give me an example. Tell me a story. I like stories.
Okay, well, I'm sure there are those examples here at Lakeside, and hopefully we're going to actually hear some maybe testimonies throughout this series. But when I started this whole ministry of life groups and transformation at my home church about, 10, 12 years, it's all a blur.
Yeah.
But it was a long time ago. I thought, okay, I identified 4 power couples, right? They were doing ministry, they'd been in Bible studies, they'd been in the church for decades, they were going to be my leaders for this ministry. So I gathered the 4 couples together, and we went through a Richard Foster study. It was actually a workbook on transformation, inner transformation. And so it was 8 weeks long, and my goal was at the end of that, each couple would then start their group, and they would take their group through this workbook.
Multiplication.
So, multiplication. It was perfect. It was
hundreds would be impacted by your amazing plan.
Absolutely.
Tell us how horrible it went.
Well, it went so well that at the end of 8 weeks, they said, actually, we just want to stay together as a group. Because here's the thing. They'd been in church for decades. They'd been in Bible studies. They'd led Bible studies. They'd been ministering in tech and whatever, Sunday school, you name it. They're your go-to people. And they'd never encountered the intimacy that they did when they journeyed with this group into deeper transformation.
Yes.
And at first I was just like, no. Now what do I do? This is the whole ministry shot. But that one group kind of went on to be almost the poster group. So they went through all kinds of stuff together. And in small group circles, we sort of have this, there's sort of it's a template, you could say, that groups tend to go through. Forming, norming, you can kind of get in a rhythm, everything's going really, really well. Then all of a sudden, storming.
Yep.
So somebody gets offended,
Yep. That
whatever.
doesn't happen here, but okay.
Most groups stop there, or people leave.
Yes.
And, groups are toxic, never want to do that again.
Yeah.
If you can push through and get to the transforming piece, that's the goal.
Yes.
That's the goal. And so they did. I mean, they went through all of that. And, in the course of 10 years, 2 of the spouses died. They went through surgeries. Some of their children went through struggles, and they were there for each other. It was a beautiful thing. I looked at it and thought, oh, that's a picture of the church right there.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
Wow. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, I think for some people, and this is what we talked about, right? Like there's just different ways, in a sense, to get at this, and it's not formulaic, but we open ourselves to it. For some people, it's transforming their daily, dog walk with their friend. it's just actually taking it to that next level to Sacred Companion. We'll continue every week to give you tools for that. But also, we want to always provide on-ramps and ways. So help me understand, what are different ways that people could maybe get involved here at Lakeside if they were looking for an on-ramp to that?
So, we've just been saying how, life groups are just a method. What I'm going to give you is pretty much, groups. But again, we're just setting the table. We're just saying, here's an offering, things you might be interested in, people you might connect with that you might not have otherwise connected with.
Yes.
As an on-ramp to further engagement, further transformation, further connection. So we've got all kinds of new groups coming online in the next month. Mm-hmm. Some are already on our website. A couple I'm really excited about. One of our entrepreneurs here at the church is going to be leading a study basically on entrepreneurship and faith. Okay. So if you're a business owner, we tend to think of when you're a business owner and you hear, a study on being a good Christian business owner, that means putting all Christianese all through your branding and putting crosses everywhere. No. This is looking at your business and your work as co-creating with God. As how can my business, my workplace, actually reflect the kingdom? And so that's an 8-week series that's starting in a couple of weeks. There's a Dream Big. I know this church is big Bob Goff lovers. Who couldn't love Bob Goff? And he's just released a book in the spring, Dream Big, and one of our ladies is going to lead a book club just for 5 weeks on Dream Big. There's going to be a fiction book club starting up. Again, there's fiction lovers. Fiction's awesome. And just, get together with a common interest and kindred spirits. And from there, if you're open, like you said, open, what could the Holy Spirit do with that? Of course, Alpha's starting up in a couple of weeks. There's our grief walk. It's on our website. Folks, if you are going through any kind of grief, there's all kinds of really neat groups there. And as you know, Marc, sometimes our deepest relationships come about in our times of greatest struggle. Yep. And, Elizabeth is doing a fantastic job. All kinds of different studies. One of them is one with horses. So if you're a horse lover, that's available. There's the marriage course starting back up. There's Celebrate Recovery, of course. So just go to our website, Next Steps. You'll see some there. There's going to be more coming on each week. And, if you look at that and you just go, I'm still not sure, I've been a little traumatized, just connect with us. The numbers on your screen say, hey, I'd love to connect with someone. I'm not even sure how to do that. Yeah. And we'd love to just facilitate connection somehow, get to know you. So, I think there's a slide for that if you text our number or fill out the Connect form on our website.
Awesome. And I was speaking with our youth pastor, Mike Tabbitt, earlier, and he was saying, as well for youth, you can reach out on our website and connect, and because they're lonely too. And so we have lots of different ways for them to connect and kind of on-ramp to exploring that. So that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for this time together today. And I'm looking forward to this series and just kind of continually giving ourselves tools, hearing more opportunities, and hearing your stories, friends, of the different ways and places that you're getting connected. And in fact, if today you're kind of like, yeah, that's my story. I had a strange way of getting connected with others. It was this kind of back door to it, so to speak. I signed up for this, or I just showed up here, or I said, whatever it is, if you just drop it in the chat, just say, hey, this is how I find a sacred companion. That'd be neat to just kind of hear some of your stories just in the live chat right now online. As we sign off together, friends, just want to remind you of a few things. If you need prayer, you can go to our connection card. It's on our website, top right corner, connect, and we would love to reach back out to you and pray with you. You can also text the number on the screen, as Robin's already mentioned. Basically, if anything that you want information on or prayer, just text that number and we would love to be in contact with you. As you go, can I just bless you with this? I love Paul's words. We could spend all day just saying, okay, but then, and I don't have, and my time and my schedule, and you don't know who I'm related to, and all that stuff. And just take Paul's words. As much as it depends on you. As much as it depends on you. Will you choose to be someone who opens yourselves to this idea of community that was core from the creation of the world? In your Creator's eyes, He made you for community. Yes, you can't control everything, but as much as it depends on you. Today, may your lunchtime conversations maybe be, hey, what's something in my life that I could do to open myself up to community? Can't wait to see you next week as we talk through point number 2 in this series. Have a great week, friends.